Good afternoon, everybody. It's my great honour to extend a very warm Mícheál Ó Fathartaigh to all of you to our live webinar this afternoon. The purpose of our webinar today is to launch our book, Developing Rural Ireland. But in reality, it is the history of our advisory service. But it is far more than that. It is a scientific publication, and indeed, it goes on to chronicle the various historic movements in the evolution of our state. It is important to extend a very special welcome to our guest today, Brendan Gleeson, in his role as Secretary General of the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. And Brendan will address you later on. But before we get proceedings underway, I want to outline that our Minister for Agriculture, Food and Marine, Deputy Charlie McConalogue, had planned on attending today, but by virtue of an unexpected event, he's not able to join us, but instead has a short video for all of us. So with that, I will introduce you to that short video.
Professor Boyle, distinguished guests, I'm delighted and honoured to have been asked to address you at the Developing Rural Ireland, A History of Irish Agricultural Advisory Services book launch. I had really wanted to be with you all in person, but due to a personal engagement, I'm afraid it was not possible today. However, thanks to the wonders of modern technology, at least I can be with you virtually to share this historic moment with you all. And history is exactly the order of the day. This book is a wonderful insight into the history of rural Ireland, agriculture and farming. For much of our country's history, agriculture and rural Ireland remain comparatively underdeveloped compared to our urban and more industrialised neighbours. But this changed dramatically in the 20th century, with agriculture going through a series of evolutions, and indeed revolutions since then. At the turn of 1900, Irish agriculture was small scale and synonymous with a poorer standard of living. Techniques were basic and comparative with the previous generations. Ultimately, there was little in the way of innovation. However, in just 100 years, that all changed, with Irish agriculture leading the world in a dynamic and ambitious way, and is synonymous now with progress and a pioneering spirit. There are many reasons why we embraced such a rapid progress and change, but central to this development was the advent of the advisory services in Ireland. With their establishment, agricultural advisors and instructors who were trained to the highest standards were dispatched across the island to work in every rural community. Their brief was simple but crucial: to work with farmers, helping them to improve their farm enterprises, and in doing so drive prosperity to all facets of rural Ireland. A lofty ambition, but a really crucial one. This strategy gradually bore fruit as each generation learned and developed new and more modern techniques. The cooperation between advisor and farmer was as strong then as it is now, with a singular focus of driving profitability while working in harmony with nature. This wonderful book tells this story so eloquently and so brilliantly. The book delves into a part of rural Ireland that many may not have been aware of. As I travel from county to county and farm to farm, I see firsthand the benefits of the advisory services. Those who started it off over 100 years ago lit a flame that burns brighter than ever today. The success of our 14 billion export sector is down in no small part to the work of highly skilled, trained and committed advisors who work so diligently with their pioneering farmers. I again thank Professor Boyle for the invitation. I apologise for not being there in person. I look forward to meeting you all in the coming weeks and months. Thank you and enjoy the launch today, and my very best wishes to everyone involved in this wonderful production and book, which will stand as a testament to our advisory services for many years to come. Thank you very much.
It is interesting that the Minister made reference to the turn of the century and who the key influencer at that particular time was Horace Plunkett. And in reality, the de facto successor of Horace Plunkett is, in today's world, the Secretary General of the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. And it is on that note, I want to ask Brendan Gleeson to speak and to officially launch today's book. Brendan, please.
Thank you, Liam, and good afternoon, everybody. And I was delighted to be asked to launch this book. It's a history of the Irish Agricultural Advisory Services, but I don't think that does it justice. It could be called a history of Ireland, because in many ways the book charts not just the evolution of the advisory service, but the manner in which that story aligns itself with the history of the state. From post-famine early 20th century Ireland, through the First World War, the Rising, the War of Independence, right through to the development of modern Ireland, with the first programme of economic expansion in the 1950s, and Ireland's entry into the EEC in 1973, and through to the role of the advisory service in 21st century Ireland, this book charts the development of the advisory services in a way that brings the great policy challenges and the historical context and the people of those times to life. And as Liam said, as Secretary General of the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, I'm aware of its strong connection with the advisory service. In its first inception, the department was called the Department of Agriculture and Technical Instruction, established by legislation in 1899. A photograph of its first secretary, T.P. Gill, hangs just outside my door in Agriculture House. But what this book tells me is that this was not the beginning. As long as there have been farmers, from the time of those who tilled the cage of fields almost 6,000 years ago, there has been agricultural innovation, new technology, and new ways of managing the land. And it tells me that from as early as the 18th century, there were efforts to formalise agricultural education and advice, and that the exploits of a British Quaker called John Cam and an agricultural economist called John Wynne Baker in the period from the 1740s to the 1760s provided the first template for an agricultural advisory service. The activities of the advisory service exercised today through the consciously Gaelic name Teagasc are more relevant than ever. As we face into the third decade of the 21st century, there are new challenges to meet. Our scientists agree that the world needs to take action now to address the climate crisis, and we know that we need to produce high-quality, safe food to feed an expanding global population. These twin objectives will not be met without the contribution of farmers supported by the very best advice. And over the next decade, I suspect that a new chapter might be added to this book, charting a further evolution of the advisory service. The highest compliment I can pay this book is that I found it a fascinating read. It's accessible and readable, and it pulls the events and the people of the times it relates to out of the pages and builds real life around them. And I know I'll dip in and out of this publication on a regular basis. So congratulations, Mícheál, and to the dedicated team that assisted you on this wonderful work. Before I conclude, my contribution today would be incomplete without saying something about Professor Gerry Boyle. I've worked closely with Gerry for many years now. In all of that time, I've found him unfailingly helpful. He's a powerful advocate for science and a powerful advocate for agriculture. He has the capacity to distill complex issues into simple and comprehensible messages. The Irish agri-food sector has been well served by that combination over the years and will continue to need advocates like Gerry. I've often relied on his advice and his wisdom, and with his indulgence will continue to do so. And I know he leaves Teagasc in a good shape under the leadership of Dr. Frank O'Mara. I wish Frank well in his new role and look forward to working closely with him over the next few years. Gerry, I wish you every happiness in whatever you choose to do in the next few years, and thanks everybody for your attention. Thank you.
Thanks, Brendan. I will now want to introduce a short live discussion between our own Mark Gibson and the author of the book, Mícheál Ó Fathartaigh. Mark, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome to this afternoon's launch, and I'm delighted to be joined by the author of Developing Rural Ireland, Dr. Mícheál Ó Fathartaigh, who is a member of the Social Sciences Research Centre at NUI Galway and a history lecturer in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at Dublin Business School. Mícheál, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Mark.
Mícheál, your passion and interest in the history of rural Ireland is clearly demonstrated in the many papers and books you've written about the topic. So what attracted you to writing about the history of the Irish Agricultural Advisory Services?
Well, Mark, what attracted me primarily was the fact that writing an institutional history of the advisory service would be the ideal prism through which to profile the development of rural Ireland in its most general sense. Professor Boyle and Larry O'Loughlin, who assembled the working group, who worked with me throughout the production of this volume, they apprehended that from the outset. As I embarked on my research, as I continued with my research, I was delighted to find just how embedded the advisory service was at every stage of that crucial 20th century that the Minister has just spoken about. So when we look at rural development in Ireland, just to reiterate what he said, the 20th century, which this book is primarily about, was the moving century. This was the century when Irish rural society transformed. We went from being laggards in a European sense to being some kind of standard bearer for progress. And at every stage of that incremental process was the advisory service. They were the key and consistent element. Alongside, it's important to acknowledge other partners such as the farmer representative organisations, but the advisory service were the constant. So this was the perfect platform for me to tell the story that I wanted to tell, the story of rural development in the 20th century.
So how does the story of developing rural Ireland and of the advisory services relate to the wider Irish story and international story of the 20th century?
Well, I was very keen in writing this book to make it as accessible as possible. And as the Secretary-General has just kindly acknowledged, I think I might have achieved that. And what I thought was going to be difficult was linking the national and international narrative to the narrative of rural development. But the fact of the matter is that if you really want to get to the kernel of the national and international narrative as it pertains to Ireland, you have to understand the narrative of rural development in the 20th century. So in profiling rural development, I was able to make easy allusions to the national narrative and indeed to reinterpret that national narrative. The fact of the matter is that if we can maybe break up the 20th century into three phases in terms of the historical narrative. You've got the first 2 decades where Ireland was still under British rule. You've got then the decades between the 1920s and the 1970s where we were paddling our own canoe. And then you've got those 30 years up to the end of the 20th century and beyond where we were members of the European Union. And the British government, successively the Irish government, and then Europe, they prioritised the potential of Ireland being realised through agricultural improvement and what we now call rural development. So the fact of the matter is that even though political history often overlooks the agricultural dimension to our narrative, it actually forms the central part of the political story as much as anything else.
And the role of women in the book is a central theme. Can you elaborate on their role in the advisory services and the development of rural Ireland?
Yes, Mark. So as historians, we have a huge obligation to rewrite women back into history. They have, as I think people recognise now, been airbrushed out of historical writing traditionally. And this was something I was keenly aware of starting out on the research and writing process. But my job was actually made quite easy by the very fact, ironically, that within the advisory service, women were benignly discriminated against. And what I mean by that is there were defined reserved roles for women within the advisory service. So for much of the 20th century, we had the poultry keeping and butter making instructresses, and we had then subsequently the farm home management advisors. And I was obligated, obviously, to tell their story as well as the story of their male counterparts. But what was really significant in that regard was that I was able to bring forward actually something else. And that is that in many ways, these women, in fulfilling their roles, enjoyed more precocious success than their male counterparts. First of all, the poultry keeping and butter making instructresses really hit the ground in the early decades of the 1900s, encouraging farming women, which is to say farmers' wives, farmers' daughters, to keep pedigree hens, which produced high-quality eggs. And this slight increase in income that this produced for family farms often made a huge difference on small to medium-sized farms, perhaps even saving several hundreds, or if not thousands, of small family farms in the early decades. And it was these female advisors working with farming women who achieved that. Equally, in the middle part of the 20th century, as Irish agriculture reorientated away from subsistence farming and towards a more commercially orientated model, it was women who, to a great extent, took the lead in this regard, fulfilling their role as farm home management advisors. They worked with the farming women, who were traditionally the mainstays in the farm homestead in terms of organising the annual budgets and so forth. They worked with them on financial planning. So they played a disproportionate role in this transformation in rural Ireland in the 20th century.
So the book has made a significant contribution to our understanding of Irish rural history, but I presume that you'd like to see more work being done in this area.
Certainly. I mean, I will make the grand claim that I think this has gone some way down the road in terms of bringing together the story of the transformation of rural Ireland in the 20th century. But there is still much more work that needs to be done. Unfortunately, historiography has largely overlooked Irish agricultural history, even though the source material is all there. And as I've been saying, it's very relevant to getting a handle on the wider historical narrative of Ireland in the 20th century. When I was writing the book, I would have liked very much to go off on tangents exploring how the advisory service responded to the existential threats that impacted on rural Ireland in the 20th century. Because history is cyclical, and there's so much we can learn from how the advisory service responded to those threats then and apply it to how we should maybe go about responding to similar threats today. Also, there's a huge amount of work to be done in terms of the local dimension as well, Mark. So as you appreciate more than anybody else, in terms of how we respond to these existential threats in the 21st century, that's going to require community initiative as well as national initiative. And for much of its history, the advisory service was a very locally configured organisation. So each individual county, as the Secretary General said, had its own advisory team, and they were left to their own devices, and they came up with bespoke responses to the big national and international problems in the 20th century. So there's so much we can learn from what they did then and apply it to now. And in the course of writing this book, I've managed to touch on 12 counties. The book features 12 case study counties, but that's only less than half of the counties covered. So I hope to get to the archives again, and I would encourage people out there who have an interest in this history to make a beeline for the Department of Agriculture Library, where there is an almost complete collection of the printed source material, and Paolo and his team will be delighted to welcome you. And also I'd send you down to the Cork Butter Museum, where Peter Foynes likewise has a trove that needs to be exploited.
And I'm sure you'll be encouraging to make a beeline to purchasing the book as well.
Most assuredly.
In due course, which is available on the Wordwell website. So, Mícheál, there we must leave it. Thank you very much for your time, and congratulations again on this wonderful achievement.
So with that, I want to introduce you to Larry O'Loughlin. Larry is one of our own. Larry is recently a retired member of our regional management team, and Larry would have been chairman of the working group who collated a huge amount of information. It's very easy, the background work has to be acknowledged, and I want to acknowledge the enormous amount of work that has been undertaken by Larry and his team. In addition to that, of course, it must be remembered that no book is complete without pictorial interest. So you can explain where you raided, or what pictorial gallery or archives you actually raided to pepper the book with such interest. Larry, it's over to you, please.
Thank you, Chairman, Director and guests. In June 2016, Teagasc hosted a celebration of Irish agriculture in Athenry, and part of that exhibition included a Millennium Wall, which was entitled Milestones in Agricultural Development, which chronicled the institutional development of Irish agriculture over the previous 100 years. And that included, of course, the Irish Agricultural Advisory Service, Resulting from that, Professor Boyle, our director, suggested that the advisory service, which at that stage was 117 years old, should be committed to a book to record its achievements and its development over the previous 117 years. And the brief was pretty simple, which was to write a popular history that meets academic scrutiny. He asked me to chair a working group of past and present, retired and present staff to work with an author, historian, in the production of such a publication. And this working group consisted of 20 retired and present members of Teagasc. And it also included 2 outside independent people, a representative from the Faculty of Agriculture in UCD and a former VEC CAO in North Tipperary. The historian Mícheál Ó Fathartaigh from the Dublin Business School was appointed the author. And the academic publishing house of Wordwell in Dublin were appointed publishers. And our first meeting was held on the 13th of October 2017. And I'm delighted to say, after 23 group meetings, 5 photo subgroup meetings and 7 publishing subgroup meetings, accounting for 200,000 words and over 200 photographs, that Mícheál Ó Fathartaigh has produced an outstanding manuscript depicting the development of Irish agriculture and rural areas in general, but in particular the role played by the Irish Agricultural Advisory Service in that development over the previous 121 years. I want to acknowledge the role everybody that has contributed to this publication. Firstly, the working group, who worked selflessly with such cooperation and positivity that it made my role as chairman very, very easy. And to all members of the group, I want to put on record mine and Teagasc's appreciation of your contribution. Time does not permit me to name you all, but suffice to say that you are acknowledged by the author in the publication. I will, however, name one person, and that's Bríd Kelly from the administrative section based in the Teagasc office in Dundalk. And Bríd was a member of the group, both representing the administrative section of the service, but also she acted as secretary to the group. And I think it's fair to say, and I'm sure everybody in the group, the author and the publishers will agree, that she did an outstanding job in supporting the administrative work of the process. One member of our working group who is not with us today is Tom Curley. Tom was head of the advisory service during the late 80s and 90s and later became assistant director of the organisation. His untimely passing in April of last year left a huge void in the working group. And to his wife Mary and family, I hope this publication will help in some small way to fill the void that I'm sure is left in your lives. The publisher Wordwell Press from Dublin were a pleasure to work with. Their contribution cannot be overstated, not just as professional publishers, but for their personal assistance and personal advice to me, to the working group, to the author, and to everybody involved. They were hugely important, and it's hugely appreciated. On behalf of the working group and all retired and present staff, I want to acknowledge the foresight and vision of our director, Professor Gerry Boyle, which he displayed in committing to this publication. As you prepare for your retirement, Gerry, after a distinguished career, you are leaving behind a legacy with this history. When I first met the author, Mícheál Ó Fathartaigh, in a hotel in Dublin in September 2017, I knew then that he was the perfect fit to write this book. His empathy, his knowledge, his understanding of Irish agriculture and Irish rural life was outstanding. And I don't think, and I'm quite sure, he did not disappoint. While it'll never be known or appreciated, the work Michael put into this, in libraries all over Ireland, and especially the Department of Agriculture Library in Dublin, in archival sections in historical institutions and universities, in sheer determination to get the facts of every story and sub-story relating to the advisory service. Mícheál, you have produced an outstanding academic and well-written tome for present and future generations of all Irish people with any interest in the development of our country. Chairman, I am delighted on behalf of the working group to present a copy of this book for the Teagasc Authority, Developing Rural Ireland, A History of the Irish Agricultural Advisory Service. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. And on behalf of the authority, it gives me great pleasure to accept this book. But I want to once again acknowledge your enormous commitment. I do know that the launching of this book and its publication was hugely important to our director, and by virtue of that I was very conscious that we should deal with the launch of this prior to his retirement. I would have spoken to Larry on a number of occasions and impressed on him the importance of delivery it on time. Like all good strategists, they're focused on delivering something on time and within budget. We'll park the budget piece for today, but he certainly delivered it on time prior to our directors parting with us. So that is something I really appreciate. And maybe on a lighter note, if there was any advantage to be gained from COVID, it was that Larry had less time to be globetrotting, and he stuck with the day job and delivered this incredible publication with his team on time. Thanks, Larry. With that, it's over to our director, Professor Gerry Boyle, to speak on behalf of the authority and to speak on the key items of the book. Professor Boyle, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary General of the Department, Brendan Gleeson, and of course, Dr. Ó Fathartaigh, author of this outstanding book, colleagues, guests. Good afternoon, everyone. Brendan Gleeson has set out very well, I think, the period prior to the establishment of the Department of Agriculture and Technical Instruction in 1899. But I've no doubt when the advisory services were established at that time as an integral part of the Department of Agriculture and Technical Instruction, under the de facto leadership of Horace Plunkett, there is no doubt that the memory of the famine framed the vision for the department and the service. I think it's a sobering thought that food security is still today a preoccupation of so many governments and international organizations and peoples in so many countries. There are so many rich veins of interest in Mícheál's book concerning the history of the service in its 122-year history that in the few minutes available to me, it's impossible to do justice to any of them. And you'll just simply have to go out and read the book to capture the breadth and depth of Dr. Ó Fathartaigh's, in my view, magisterial work. The book addresses so many themes, such as the evolution and numbers of general advisors and specialist advisors. And Mícheál has touched on this earlier, that dealt with farmyard enterprises, all of whom are women. The political attitude to the service from the early days of British rule to the position of various governments since independence. The various structural changes in the service mooted and implemented over the years, including the possibility of a land grant type structure considered as a result of the Marshall Aid Initiative in the early 1950s, that ultimately led to the establishment of An Foras Salúntas in 1958, which was resurrected in a very similar idea by Mark Clinton shortly after accession to the European Economic Community. To the ill-fated parish plan of James Dillon in the mid-1950s. Events such as the founding of ACOT in 1980 and the disestablishment of the County Committees of Agriculture, the introduction of charges in 1987, and of course the establishment of Teagasc in 1988. Each of these episodes, and many more in the book, would be worthy of scholarly treatises of themselves. And indeed, Mícheál's treatment of various episodes and personalities in a number of the County Committees of Agriculture is a rewarding read in itself. But as I read and reread the book in preparing a few thoughts to write the foreword, I was struck that what emerges so clearly is the critical public good role of the advisory service that emerges time and time again over the 122-year history. Throughout its history, when the agricultural sector needed to be mobilised in the interests of national policy, the service stood up to the plate. It took on the burden of public responsibility, even when resources were not always sufficient to the task. That's not to say that serving the needs of individual farmers or processing organisations was not also a focus of the service over the years, but this is a contested space, and the Public Advisory Service is not the only player in this respect, particularly in recent years. But what this book powerfully shows is that the unique contribution of the Public Advisory Service is its public service. Simply put, there are so many occasions throughout its history that if the service hadn't existed, it would have simply had to be invented. When Thatcherism and Reaganism prevailed in the 1980s, and the privatisation of every public service was considered expedient, whether by accident or design, successive Irish governments retained the Public Advisory Service, even if they couldn't resist periodic assaults on staffing levels. I'd like to think that somewhere in our collective psyche, the critical value of the service to the agriculture and food sector and rural Ireland was understood. And as we'd expect from a historian of Dr. O'Fathartaigh's calibre, his book provides ample evidence to support this proposition. The very first instance where the service was called upon and mobilised to respond to a national crisis occurred on the 19th of August, 15 days after Britain declared war in Germany. The new Department of Agriculture and Technical Instruction summoned agricultural advisors to a special meeting in Dublin to discuss what steps should be taken to increase the supply of food. As a consequence, the acreage under wheat increased between 1916 and 1917 in County Galway by 62% and in County Laois by 83%. But the advisory service played so many critical roles in the years to follow. I think it's important that we note the contribution the service played to the development of our beet industry, for example. The commitment to upgrading the technical capacity of Irish farmers was evident from the mid-1920s with the setting up of the famous winter schools, or winter classes. These classes grew from an initial 49 centres and 761 students in the mid-1920s to, by 1944-45, there were 125 centres and over 4,000 students. And incidentally, in the late 1930s, a young Tom Walsh would ply his trade as an advisor in my own parish of Rare Cross in West Tipperary and became famous for his winter night classes, and he is still remembered in the parish to this day. The new Fianna Fáil government in 1932 again embraced and understood the importance of the advisory service. And of course, the Fianna Fáil government of that period, and was the case with subsequent Fianna Fáil governments, they were very determined to grow the tillage area. The increases in wheat production were hugely successful, notwithstanding the miserly attitude from the Department of Finance. National acreage grew from over 22,000 acres in 1932 to 254,000 acres in 1939. Again, the Emergency Act of 1939 ushered in what you might call a third compulsory tillage programme, and the advisory service were expected and called upon to lead and manage. Indeed, a month after the commencement of the Second World War, the department again summoned what were a total of 47 advisors to Dublin to plan for the implementation of the compulsory tillage order. Post-war, the 1951-54 Fianna Fáil government again rekindled and renewed their interest in the tillage drive. And on this occasion, all the chairpersons and secretaries of the county committees of agriculture were summoned to Dublin again to be addressed by the Minister for Agriculture and De Valera on the importance of increasing the tillage acreage. Such was the centrality of the advisory service to public policy. And again, in the period up to the mid-1950s, we had a substantial response in terms of wheat acreage. If we look at the Programme for Economic Expansion, produced of course by T.K. Whittaker, what's often forgotten is the centrality of agriculture to that document. In 11 out of the 24 chapters of economic development, there is mention of agriculture. And Whittaker was a tremendous champion of the advisory services and argued for the integration of the services, the advisory research in the newly established An Foras Salúntas and education. If we look forward again to the run-up to access to the European Economic Community, again the advisory service were called upon to prepare the ground. Mind you, the sector didn't get long to bask in the glow of accession. Some of us can remember the early 1980s when interest rates reached a peak of 20% on foot of chronic inflation. And here again, the advisory service stepped forward in the public interest. Advisors worked alongside the farm organisations to help farmers in negotiating solutions with the banks. Indeed, you could think of the advisors as latter-day personal insolvency practitioners. And it's another example of the importance of the service in being mobilised in the national interest. And if you look to the wake of the milk quota, when farmers were clearly stopped in their advance in milk production that had been evident up to the introduction of the quota, the advisory service, supported by a bewildering array of coupled payments and backed by research at Grange, provided tremendous support for the resulting increase in the suckler herd. And of course, alongside this measure, the advisory service began to implement several complex and large EEC schemes, the most important of which at the time was the Farm Modernization Scheme. And then in 1980, we had the establishment of ACOT, which led to the centralisation of the service, which enabled the service now to be more efficiently mobilised in the national interest, and also to equalise the distribution of advisors relative to farmers around the country. And ACOT delivered. Early in its life, probably one of the greatest legacies of that period, and indeed of ACOT, was the setting up of what we now know today as the Green Cert, which in my view is one of the enduring legacies of ACOT. And I think it's important that we record our appreciation to the vision of Liam Downey, Johnny Callaghan, and the late David O'Connor. I've only given, Chairman, a very broad brush treatment of the public good contributions of the advisory service over the years. The examples where the service supported the development of new enterprises and diversification and technological innovations are simply too numerous to document in areas such as mushrooms, soft fruit, forestry, and in the area of technological innovation. The promotion of the EBI and rotational grazing stand out, as well as the promotion, of course, of discussion groups. History should always cause us to reflect, and Dr. O'Fathartaigh's book certainly does that. The Modern Advisory Service is now embedded within a wider agricultural knowledge innovation system that embraces research and education, and of course farmers themselves, and a host of other actors that influence farmers in their farming decisions. And as I said at the outset, for me the enduring message from Mícheál's book is that the unique contribution of the Public Advisory Service is its role in the delivery of public services. There is a message I would submit that all those involved in the service, especially in its leadership, should never forget. And as we face into the future, as Brendan Gleeson said, when new challenges are presented, especially in relation to combating climate change, there is absolutely no doubt that there will be a need for a committed, public, dedicated service to address that challenge and overcome it. And I do also want to acknowledge, Chairman, a number of people that are responsible for this publication today. Of course, pride of place must go to Dr. Ó Fathartaigh for this important work, and to the publishers, Wordwell Press, for producing such a magnificent publication. And in particular, I'd like to acknowledge the contribution of Nick Maxwell and Ronan Cogley of Wordwell. And of course, Larry and the entire steering group for the project deserve great credit for bringing this project to completion. Larry and the steering group exhibited what for me, as I say, is one of the enduring and standout themes of this book. A dedication, and that is a dedication and passion for public service, independently delivered in the national interest. I urge anyone interested in the advisory services and in rural development to buy this book, and above all else, to read it. Thank you.
Thanks, Director. That was something that was very much appreciated, but I think it would be remiss of me to say that this book just didn't happen by accident. Our Director, Professor Boyle, was instrumental in initiating it. He certainly kept it active. He supported and encouraged the entire team to bring it to fruition. During the interview a few moments ago with Mark and Dr. Ó Fathartaigh, it certainly struck a personal chord with me for a moment, and I've absolutely no doubt that throughout rural Ireland, every household can identify with it. For me personally, he made reference to the poultry instructresses of an era long gone. My late mother, who was born in 1922, would be 100 if she lived for next year, was a poultry instructress educated at the Munster Institute in Cork. And another one of my fellow authority members, Professor Gerry Fitzgerald, his mother from West Cork also shared the very same background. But alas, then we had the marriage ban. So all I can say is, haven't we come a long ways? So with that, I just want to say to you, thanks to the Director for your commitment and support in bringing this to fruition. All that's left from me at this stage is to remind everybody and to encourage everybody to buy this book. I can rest assured it certainly would not be left. Once you dip into it, it will be compulsive reading. I think what is important at this point is to remind everybody that this is a live webinar. I'm now bringing this to a close. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being with us for over the past hour.